So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor. And, you know, the World Bank estimated, I don't remember how many months ago, it's probably 9 months ago, that we're putting 350 million people on the brink of starvation because we're cranking energy prices up. And so for me, it's like, that's 350 million people. That's 3 times as many as the communists killed, you know, in their 6 decades of trying. And if your cure for the planet is, well, you know, we got to put 350 million poor people in jeopardy just so that things are hypothetically better in 100 years, I think, yeah, I don't think so, buddy.
Jordan Peterson doesn't hold back on what he thinks about the demons in Davos. We're going to see what Peterson had to say about the World Economic Forum, which left Joe Rogan absolutely speechless for like 5 minutes. And we're going to see precisely why the world is turning against them, such that the days of the WEF are indeed coming to an end. You are not going to want to miss this.
I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, you know, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is an unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or a billion, you know, in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything, and, you know, controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much.
So that was an excellent summary on what Peterson called more or less the veritable religious sentiments that underline the whole project of the WEF, which of course just had their annual meeting in Davos a couple of weeks back. But what Peterson did there for us is he gave us a summary of the beliefs of the kind of sacred narrative that frames the whole rationale for the WEF. The underlying assumption here is that the human race is a threat, quite literally a pathogen to the planet. Humanity, under the guise of industrialization, which entailed patriarchy and racist colonization, humanity has radically disrupted the original state of the environment, which was imagined as a primeval ecological utopia. And in the name of restoring this primeval ecological utopia, the behavior of humanity has to be radically regulated and engineered by a cooperation of big business and big government. Now, for me, it's like the WEF never heard of what's known as the anthropic principle in physics. Have you heard of that? The anthropic principle? It's the notion that the universe has been so finely tuned that creating and sustaining human life was inevitable. The fine-tunedness of the universe is exactly what it's supposed to be in order to produce and sustain human life. And so there are those who see the anthropic principle as evidence that the universe was created precisely for humanity. But the myth that underlies the WEF inverts that. Humanity was created for the ecology. It's right. And this demands a new kind of priesthood emerge, which will be in charge of engineering the kind of behavior that humanity needs to exemplify in order to restore this primeval ecological state.
So, you know, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that. But, you know, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, you know, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since really literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? And like, I've really felt that I've been at war for the last 6 months. And I would say it's war because what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that well, and you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. You know, and they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomberg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die.
Now, this for me is the whole horrible tragedy in all this, and Peterson gets more into it throughout the segment. But what we have to really get here is that the political left has now for decades amassed a very loyal constituency, and that, of course, is the poor and, to a certain extent, a healthy segment of the middle class. And what we have to understand is that those people, those constituents of the left, are now being used by the left in the rather diabolical enactment of this ecological mythology. Joel Kotkin recently observed that environmentalism is basically crushing the traditional social democratic vision, which was an upwardly mobile middle class. Today, the middle class is being told you should have less children, you shouldn't be owning homes or cars, and you should live like the good serfs you're supposed to be. And for the poor and welfare dependent, there's nothing they can do because they basically sold their souls to the political left. The political left literally owns them. It gives them their cash, their apartments, their health care, their food stamps. And what we're seeing now is how the political left is exploiting these political and economic links to force tens of millions of people into social conditions that are putting their very lives at risk. But it gets worse. You will not believe what Peterson said next. Hey, gang, with all of this freakiness going on with the WEF, my family and I have decided to declare 2023 as the year of family preparedness in the Turley household. I'm starting off this new year covering all my bases. We're talking food storage, survival kits, and everything my family needs to make sure that we'll survive whatever this upcoming year throws at us. I recently interviewed TJ Johnson, the founder and CEO of Ready Project, and if you haven't watched that interview yet, you've got to. I'll link it down below for you. It's absolutely amazing. This interview will single-handedly tell you why I'm placing preparedness at the top of my list of priorities, and I invite you to join me this year in my resolution to family preparedness and take the immediate steps to get yourself and your family prepared today so you can eat tomorrow. And if you act right now, you can take advantage of Ready Project's special offer just for my listeners with huge limited time savings. So don't wait. Click on that link below to learn more about my plan and what I'm doing to make sure my family has all the emergency essentials that'll be needed for this year and for 20 years afterward. Join me, take action, click below, and let's get our families prepared together.
And I could see this coming. You really saw it happening in Germany and the UK, you know, where we have this absolute rat's nest of way more expensive energy. And this is where it gets extremely perverse. You know, you might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really. That'd be fine with me if the consequence of your actions, raising energy prices, for example, actually produced an improvement in those things you wanted to improve. So, for example, energy is more expensive, but now the air is cleaner. But that isn't what's happened in Germany. Right. What's happened in Germany is energy is like 5 times as expensive, and the coal plants are back on. So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor.
This is what I find so ultimately pernicious about this whole WEF project. In the end, it doesn't even achieve its stated goals. The Danish statistician Bjorn Lomborg has pointed out that even if we did everything that the Paris Accord required us, every single thing required, all the industrialized sacrifices, all of that effort would amount to a reduction of climate temperature by the end of the century to no more than about 0.5 degrees Celsius. You may have seen Konstantin Kissin's recent viral video at the Oxford Student Union, where he pointed out that even if the whole of the United Kingdom were to disappear into the ocean, that disappearance would objectively make zero impact on global emissions. All the green policies advocated by the WEF and implemented by participating governments, in the end, make virtually no difference whatsoever to the global climate. And yet, think of how many people have needlessly suffered as a result of these unattainable goals. Just think of Sri Lanka. A couple of years back, their new president dove headfirst into the WEF and imposed a radical green policy on their nation. Leaders wanted Sri Lanka to be the world's first 100% organic country. They banned any kind of chemical in their fertilizer. They implemented all kinds of green-inspired restrictions in their food production. And it didn't take long for the obvious result to become clear. Basically, their food production collapsed, and the nation descended to the brink of starvation and political chaos. The good news is that even the New York Times is admitting that the relevance of the WEF is waning all over the world. The political order that allowed the WEF to amass the power that it did over the last 30 years has basically collapsed. And a far more nationalist, populist, and civilizationalist world order is rising, a world that wants nothing to do with the demons in Davos. Unfortunately for so many around the world, until that new political order fully realizes itself, the WEF will continue trying to implement its mythological nightmare, leaving an untold number of victims, the very ones who thought the political left was their hope, in its wake. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You'll definitely want to check out my latest video on Jordan Peterson leaving Piers Morgan speechless on Vladimir Putin. It's going to absolutely fascinate you. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.